I caught my husband with his affair partner at the airport and decided to follow them to Paris. My world was shattered in an airport terminal when I discovered my husband with another woman. But a chance encounter with a handsome and charming airline pilot led me on a whirlwind romance to Paris. And yet, my heart wasn't sure if something like that could last. Brian and I had reached a crossroads in our marriage. I didn't fully understand it at the time, but something between us had changed. Despite everything, I still held on to hope for our relationship. I believed we could find our way back to each other. That's why I found myself at the crowded international airport, clutching my ticket to Paris with trembling hands. My stomach was full of butterflies, and I tried my best to push down the nervous feelings that kept rising up inside me. I had planned this surprise carefully. Brian was on a business trip to France, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to surprise him. We could spend time together in the city of love and maybe reignite the romance that seemed to be slipping away from us. But as I walked through the busy airport, scanning the crowds for any sign of my husband, my heart suddenly dropped. There, in the distance, I could see Brian's familiar silhouette. My excitement quickly turned to confusion, then to devastating realization. He wasn't alone. A young woman was walking beside him, and they were linked arm in arm in an intimate way that made my blood run cold. I watched in shock as they moved through the airport together, completely unaware of my presence. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. "Brian!" I called out, my voice cutting through the airport noise. He turned toward the sound of my voice, and I watched his face change completely. First came surprise, his eyes widening as he saw me standing there. Then, almost immediately, his expression shifted to something cold and detached. Without hesitation, he let go of the woman's arm and walked over to me, leaving her standing alone. "Ava, why are you here?" he asked, and I could hear the irritation in his voice. His brow was furrowed in a deep frown. My voice was shaking as I tried to explain. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought we could spend time together in Paris." Even as I spoke the words, I could feel my romantic fantasy crumbling around me like a house of cards. Brian's lips pressed together in obvious annoyance. He grabbed my arm and pulled me farther away from the crowds, away from the woman who was still standing where he had left her. "This isn't a good time, Ava. This is a business trip," he said dismissively. Then, to my absolute horror, he reached out and snatched my ticket from my hands. Before I could react, he tore it into pieces, letting the fragments fall to the airport floor. "And before you get any ideas, she's just a colleague. Nothing more. You need to go home." I felt tears beginning to well up in my eyes as I looked at the torn pieces of my ticket scattered on the ground. "I thought we were trying to fix things," I whispered, my heart breaking with each word. "This was a mistake," Brian said, his voice cold and distant. "You need to leave." Without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched as he returned to the woman, took her hand in his, and continued toward their gate. They disappeared into the crowd, leaving me standing there completely crushed and alone. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. My legs felt weak, and I sank down to the airport floor, leaning against my suitcase as I sobbed. Everything I had hoped for, everything I had planned was gone. I felt completely broken. That's where Jack found me. "Are you okay?" I looked up through my tears to see a man standing over me. His voice was filled with genuine concern, and when I met his eyes, I was struck by how kind they were. He was wearing a pilot's uniform, which made him look incredibly handsome and professional. Through my tears, I told him everything that had just happened. I explained about the surprise trip, about seeing Brian with another woman, about how he had torn up my ticket and told me to go home. Jack listened patiently to every word. When I finished, he did something completely unexpected. "I can offer you a first-class seat to Paris," he said simply. "No strings attached." I stared at him in shock. "Why would you help me?" I asked. "You don't even know me." Jack smiled warmly, and I could see genuine kindness in his expression. "Everyone deserves a fresh start," he replied. For the first time since seeing Brian at the airport, I found myself smiling back, even if it was just slightly. I accepted his offer, hoping that maybe Paris could help heal my shattered heart. Soon I found myself settled into a luxurious first-class seat. The comfort was exactly what I needed after everything that had happened. For the first time in hours, I felt a sense of peace washing over me. The plush seat, the quiet atmosphere, the attentive service, it all helped to distance me from the painful scene that had just unfolded. This luxury felt like the perfect balm for my broken heart. But my tranquility didn't last long. Suddenly, Brian appeared in the first-class cabin. His face was twisted with anger and indignation as he spotted me in my seat. "What are you doing here?" he sneered, his voice full of contempt. I explained about Jack's kind invitation, but this only seemed to make Brian angrier. I watched as his face grew redder and redder, his fury building with each passing second. But then Jack appeared as if from nowhere. His presence was commanding, and there was no question about his authority in this situation. "She's here at my invitation," Jack said firmly, his voice leaving no room for argument. With quiet but undeniable authority, Jack directed Brian back to the economy class section, leaving me safe in my first-class seat, finally able to breathe again. I felt such overwhelming gratitude toward Jack for standing up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with relief and appreciation. "You're welcome," Jack replied, that same warm smile lighting up his face. "Enjoy the flight, and remember, you deserve to be treated with respect, here and everywhere else." With those encouraging words, he turned and made his way back to the cockpit to continue his duties as pilot. I settled back into my comfortable seat, feeling exhausted from all the emotional turmoil of the day. I was ready to sleep through the entire flight and try to forget everything that had happened. But just as I was getting comfortable and closing my eyes, Brian appeared in front of me again. This time, something was different about him. I could smell cheap vodka on his breath, and his eyes had a mean, dangerous look that I had never seen before. But his words were even more shocking than his appearance. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Enjoying your little victory lap up here in first class? Well, listen closely, Ava, because I want you to understand exactly what's going to happen." He leaned closer, and I could smell more alcohol on his breath. "The first thing I'll do when we land in Paris is cut off all your credit cards. Every single one. Let's see how far you get in a foreign country without a penny to your name." I stared at him in complete shock. Was this really my husband? The man I had married? The man I had loved? I had never seen this cruel, vindictive side of him before, and it terrified me. Before I could even process what he had said or figure out how to respond, a flight attendant appeared beside us. "Sir, I'm going to need to ask you to return to your seat," she said politely but firmly to Brian. "You're disturbing other passengers." Brian glared at me one more time before reluctantly walking back toward the economy section, leaving me shaken and afraid. A few minutes later, Jack was back at my side. He must have noticed something was wrong because his expression was full of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. I told him about Brian's threats, about how he planned to cut off my credit cards and leave me stranded in Paris. Jack listened carefully, and when I finished, he made an offer that I couldn't believe. "I'll ensure you're not alone in Paris," he said, his bright, beautiful eyes filled with sincerity. "You can stay in my hotel suite. All expenses covered. You won't have to worry about anything." I looked at him in complete disbelief. "But why would you do this for me?" I asked. "We barely know each other." I was incredibly grateful, of course, but I had learned that the world could be a cruel place. Yet here was this man who had treated me with more kindness and respect in the past few hours than my own husband had shown me during our entire relationship. "It's the right thing to do," Jack replied simply. "Besides, I have a feeling that Paris might just be the beginning of a new chapter for you. A chapter filled with hope and healing. Let me be part of that journey, even if it's just as a friend offering support." For the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself genuinely smiling. I accepted his generous offer and felt a small spark of hope beginning to grow in my chest. Once we arrived in Paris, the vibrant streets of the city became my healing ground. Jack, acting as my unexpected guardian angel, guided me through the beautiful city. Each day we spent together seemed to mend my broken heart a little bit more. We explored this wonderful place together, from the peaceful banks of the Seine River to the bustling, artistic neighborhood of Montmartre. As we walked through the charming streets and visited famous landmarks, I found myself sharing my innermost thoughts and feelings with Jack. I told him things I had never told anyone before, and I felt an unexpected bond forming between us. One evening, as we stood together under the magical glow of the Eiffel Tower, I realized that my feelings for Jack had evolved into something much deeper than gratitude or friendship. This realization was both exciting and frightening, especially since I had only just met him. Perhaps it was the magic of this incredible city affecting me. Maybe these feelings weren't real, just a reaction to everything I had been through. But despite my doubts, the emotions felt completely genuine and true. The magic of Paris had more surprises in store for me. One crisp morning, as I was having coffee and watching the city wake up around me, I received an email that would completely change the direction of my journey once again. Before I had decided to chase Brian on his so-called business trip to Paris, back when I was still trying to save our marriage, I had applied for a job I had seen advertised on LinkedIn. It was a position at a prestigious fashion house, the kind of opportunity one had always dreamed of but never thought I could actually get. The email in my inbox was from that very fashion house. They were interested in interviewing me for the position. This job could mean everything: a stable income, an independent life, and the chance to start over completely in this beautiful new city. Accepting this position would mean anchoring myself to Paris permanently. It would mean committing to a life that was still foreign and unfamiliar to me. But more than anything else, it raised a question that tugged at my heart in the most painful way. What would this mean for my budding relationship with Jack? I felt completely conflicted about what to do. The opportunity was everything I had ever dreamed of professionally, but I couldn't make this decision without talking to Jack first. So during one of our walks through the city, a rain-soaked afternoon when the streets glistened and the air smelled fresh and clean, I brought up the job offer. I explained everything to him carefully. I told him about the position, about what it would mean for my career, and about how it would require me to stay in Paris indefinitely. I watched his face as I spoke, trying to read his emotions. "I'm so proud of you," Jack said when I finished explaining everything. His voice was warm and encouraging, filled with genuine happiness for me. "This is an incredible opportunity, Ava. You've come so far from that broken woman I found crying in the airport. You deserve every bit of success and happiness that comes your way." His words made me feel proud, but they also made me more confused. "But what about us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to what we've built together?" Jack stopped walking and turned to face me completely. He reached out and took both of my hands in his, holding them gently but firmly. "What we have is special," he said, looking directly into my eyes. "I won't pretend that this doesn't complicate things between us. But I also know that real love isn't about holding each other back from our dreams. It's about supporting each other, even when it's difficult." I felt tears beginning to glisten in my eyes as the truth of his words sank deep into my heart. Here was a man who truly wanted what was best for me, who understood the importance of me finding my own way in the world. It was such a different experience from my marriage with Brian, where I had always felt like I was being held back or controlled. "You have a chance to start completely anew," Jack continued, squeezing my hands reassuringly. "You can build a life that's entirely your own, free from anyone else's expectations or limitations. No matter what you decide to do, I'll be here for you. We'll figure out the rest of it together, step by step." As we kissed under the twinkling streetlights with the rain falling gently around us, I could hear the sounds of the city continuing around us, cars passing by, people talking as they hurried past under umbrellas, the distant sound of music from a cafe. In that moment, I felt such a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Paris had offered me a chance at redemption and a fresh start, and in Jack, I had found not just a lover, but a true partner who wanted to see me succeed. While we prepared for our departure from Paris, Jack offered me a choice that showed just how much he cared about my happiness. "You can return with me to New York," he said, "or you can stay here in Paris for the job. Either way, I'll try to make it work between us." I was deeply touched by his support and willingness to sacrifice for our relationship. But as I thought about it more, I realized what I truly wanted most of all. "I found strength and independence here in Paris, Jack," I shared with him honestly. "But you have changed everything for me. You've shown me what it feels like to be truly valued and respected. I want to give us a real chance." So during our last romantic walk along the Seine River, watching the water flow peacefully past the beautiful buildings, we made our decision together. We would return to New York as a couple, committed to building a life together. However, the harsh reality of our situation became clear once we landed at JFK Airport. The magic of Paris felt very far away as we stood in the busy, crowded terminal. I met Jack at baggage claim, and as we walked outside into the New York air, he began to express concerns about the practical aspects of our relationship. "My job is not just a job to me, Ava," he said carefully, his voice more serious than I had heard it in Paris. "Flying, exploring new cities, being up in the sky, it's a fundamental part of who I am as a person. I'm away from home a lot, sometimes for days or weeks at a time. I worry about what that means for us and our relationship." I could hear the concern in his voice, and I wanted to reassure him. "I love you, Jack," I said firmly. "And while I'm scared about the unknowns, I believe we can navigate this together." We can make it work. But Jack wasn't finished expressing his worries. It might not work out between us, he continued, and the words hung heavy in the air between us like a dark cloud. Let's take a few days to think about this carefully, to really think about us and what we're getting into. I want you to be absolutely sure about this decision. I nodded, swallowing hard as I felt our beautiful Parisian love bubble beginning to burst around us. The reality of life was setting in, and it felt much more complicated than the romantic dream we had been living in France. Then Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a hotel voucher, placing it gently in my hands. I don't want you to feel unsupported or abandoned, he said softly. This will give you a comfortable place to stay while you take your time to decide what you really want, especially about your situation with Brian and what you want to do about your marriage. He paused for a moment, then added, I'll be in touch with you soon. I looked down at the voucher in my hands, then back up at his kind face. I swear I want to make this work between us, Jack, I said desperately, hoping he could hear the sincerity in my voice. I don't want to lose what we found together. Jack's expression was gentle but serious. I still think we both should take some time apart to think clearly, he said honestly. Traveling can muddle your brain, especially when it comes to matters of the heart and love. Sometimes what feels right in a romantic setting doesn't translate to real life. We said goodbye with just a small, gentle peck on the lips. It felt so different from the passionate kisses we had shared under the Eiffel Tower, and that difference made my heart ache. I remained alone at the terminal long after Jack had disappeared into the crowd. I sat on one of the uncomfortable airport chairs, staring at the voucher in my hands and contemplating what my future might hold. Should I fight for my marriage with Brian? Should I pursue this new relationship with Jack? Should I focus on building an independent life for myself? While I was lost in these deep thoughts about my future, a familiar and unwelcome voice suddenly interrupted my solitude. Well, how's life treating you after your little escapade with the pilot? Brian's mocking voice cut through my thoughts like a knife. I looked up to see him standing there with his mistress by his side, the same young woman I had seen him with at the airport in what felt like a lifetime ago. His voice was full of cruel amusement, and he seemed to be enjoying my obvious distress. Go away, Brian, I said firmly, grabbing my suitcase and starting to roll it away from him. I had no desire to engage with his cruelty. But Brian wasn't finished tormenting me. Wait there, my dear wife, he called after me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. How's life treating you after your little affair with the pilot? Didn't take very long for that fairy tale romance to fall apart, did it? Are you sitting here all alone, waiting for your loving husband to rescue you and take you back? The woman standing beside him, who I now realized must be Nina, suddenly spoke up with confusion in her voice. Wife? She asked, looking between Brian and me with growing realization. Nina, not now, Brian said dismissively, clearly annoyed that she had spoken up at this particular moment. But I could see the understanding dawning on Nina's face as she processed what she had just heard. She had clearly been told that Brian was single, and now she was discovering the truth about his marital status. Suddenly, her hand moved through the air with lightning speed, and a sharp, unmistakable crack echoed through the busy terminal. Nina had slapped Brian across the face with considerable force. You lied to me, she exclaimed, her voice filled with anger and betrayal. You told me you were divorced. Brian stood there, completely stunned by the slap. His face was red where she had hit him, and for once in his life, he seemed to have no defense or clever comeback ready. Nina then turned to face me, her eyes filled with genuine remorse and embarrassment. I'm so sorry, she said, her voice sincere. I had no idea he was married. If I had known, I never would have gotten involved with him. I looked at this woman who had unknowingly been part of the destruction of my marriage, and I found that I couldn't bring myself to hate her. She had been deceived just as much as I had been. It's not your fault, I said, crossing my arms as I turned my gaze back to my husband. You didn't know the truth about who he really was. Nina straightened her shoulders and faced Brian with newfound determination. We're done, she declared firmly. I don't want to see you again. And with that, she walked away, her head held high. Now it was just Brian and me, standing in the middle of the busy airport. I looked at this man I had once loved, this man I had been married to for years, and I realized something profound had changed inside me. I didn't feel an ounce of love for him anymore. In fact, I almost wanted to laugh at how pathetic he looked standing there, rejected by both his wife and his mistress in the span of a few minutes. Goodbye, Brian, I said simply, and I walked away from him just as Nina had done. The feeling was absolutely liberating. For For the first time in years, I was walking away from him instead of begging him to stay or trying to fix our broken relationship. Over the following weeks, as I settled into life in New York, I found that the vibrancy of the city seemed to mirror my own personal transformation. I had evolved from a sad, lonely woman trapped in a loveless marriage into someone who was discovering her own strength and independence. As I reflected on my incredible journey with Jack and everything we had experienced together in Paris, I realized that our shared adventures had ignited a deep desire within me for more adventure and personal growth. I wanted to see the world, to explore new places, and to continue growing as a person. That's when I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided to become a flight attendant, blending my newfound independence with my love for Jack and the excitement of life in the skies. With Jack's encouragement and support, I navigated the entire application process and completed the rigorous training program. During this time, our relationship continued to grow and mature into a truly fantastic partnership based on mutual respect and shared dreams. Finally, the day came when I was assigned to my very first flight as a professional flight attendant. By an incredible coincidence, it was on one of Jack's routes. As I walked down the airplane aisle in my crisp new uniform, I caught sight of Jack's face in the cockpit doorway. His expression was filled with pride and love as he watched me. When we had a moment alone, his embrace and the kiss we shared were filled with all the promise of the brightest possible future together, soaring through the skies as partners in both love and adventure.